This is the Harmonic Motion Podcast, a place where you, dear listener, can join with automotive aftermarket professionals as they delve into and discuss the matters which matter.
Hello, I'm your host, James Dillon. Welcome to this episode of Harmonic Motion Podcast, where I have the absolute delight and pleasure to spend time in the company of Alex Lindley of Lindley Auto Centre's Nottingham and of Garage Hive fame. Alex and I kick around a lot of the subjects that affect the industry today, and if you're a vehicle technician, a garage owner, front of house, or business manager, please buckle up and listen in as Alex and I talk around some of the matters which matter. So I'm delighted to welcome onto this episode Alex Lindley, motor trade guru, software entrepreneur, and general all-round good guy, for a chat about all things to do with automotive. So really, thanks ever so much for giving up your time, Alex, and appearing on the Harmonic Motion Podcast. I really appreciate that.
Well, that's quite the intro. And thank you very much for the invite. I am a fan of the podcast as well.
Oh, lovely. That's great to hear. Thank you. So yeah, matters that matter. That's one of the strap lines, and I'm hoping that we can spend a bit of time kicking around some of the thoughts and ideas and things that you've got going on in your world. Maybe things that that affect the wider motor trade, and come to no conclusions, but have a jolly good conversation. Maybe.
Yeah, sounds good to me. I'm up for that.
Excellent. And Alex, I know a little bit about you. We've met several occasions, but I'm no means an expert on your life story. And I wondered whether you might be able to open us up with a brief introduction of you yourself, your voyage maybe in the motor industry, to help our listener understand a bit about your background.
Okay, well, I'll start by speaking about Lindley's Auto Centres, which is the family business. But halfway through the story, then Garage Hive sort of enters the fray. So the story is going to go off on a bit of a very slight tangent halfway through. So never intended to join the automotive industry. It was sort of family business, which had actually been running from 1957. So there's quite some history there. It was my granddad started it, and then my dad worked for my granddad, and then eventually I ended up working for my dad. So this was back in 2004 when I joined the business, straight from school, straight into college. It wasn't an apprenticeship. It was a 3-day, technically a full-time college course, which was 3 days a week, a national diploma in automotive. I can't remember the exact course. It wasn't a particularly good course, to be fair. And then the remaining 3 days, not remaining 3 days, the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I was then at work in the family business. So 3 days at college, 3 days at work. And we were predominantly engine specialists. So that's what I cut my teeth on. It was all about, at that time, the K-Series engines, Ecotech, Z-Tech engines. We primarily did head gasket work, engine rebuilds, engine reconditioning, refacing, all of that sort of fun stuff. And we enjoyed doing it. We built a good business off the back of it. And I know we're going to speak about data later on and measuring data and improving efficiencies, but because the work was so consistently there, the way that we sort of G'd each other up back in those days was we used to waste about half an hour in the morning lining these cars up in a row, particularly K-Series, and then racing each other to see who could do them the quickest. Things are slightly different today, but even then we had this sort of mentality just to try and push each other on. Although I'm sure that the overall effectiveness of that wasn't particularly good. It was particularly good fun. But those days weren't to last, and it became, as you know now, it's sort of the engine rebuilding industry is unfortunately a dying industry. It's still a bit of a niche, but it's certainly, there's no real longevity, or it's very difficult to scale that business up any more. So in 2010, we decided to look elsewhere, and that's when we started with the MOT bay. So we installed an MOT bay, completely new to us. Bear in mind, at this point, we'd not even so much as fitted a tyre. So we go straight into MOTs, decide to start servicing. And I was the first MOT tester. I still remember my first MOT test. And that really changed the direction of the business. And it was then in 2012 where things started to really change for the family business. I started to take more of an active interest in the way the business was running. it was around about that time that I started to learn how to do bookkeeping, and where my sort of natural interest in sort of figures and analysis and performance started to sort of grow from that point. And that's when we actually got offered our second location. So we were incredibly lucky. We did all this garage's trade work. The business owner got poorly. We knew all of the staff. They essentially gave it to us on a plate. I mean, we still had to pay market rate, but we had no competition. And it was an incredibly good opportunity. And the really cool thing about that business is it was only service MOT oriented. It was a pure sort of what you'd call a fast fit business. Incredible retail customers, fully staffed, etc. And that was my first real move into management. So this is now, 2012. I leave the nest, so to speak, and I get pushed into this new branch on my own. And I'm now managing this branch. And I can't remember exactly how old, in the realms of 23, 24 years old, I think, something around there. And all of a sudden I'm managing a team of about 7 people with the average age of about 60. So it was quite the learning curve. I walked in with my laptop on my first day, and we were using Garage Assistant at the time. And I'm not exaggerating when I say they were using typewriters and pen and paper. And they even had up on the wall in reception, they had a VAT chart of like 1p plus VAT, 2p plus VAT, 3. That's how this business was running. So it was an interesting experience, and quite the learning curve, to be honest with you. Now that was all good. Proceed another 2 years down the line, and because we'd done so well at this second site, because it was a gold mine and it was more luck than judgment, we still weren't I would say that we weren't particularly good at business, but we were hard workers, and we were good with people. So 2 fundamentals made it quite easy to succeed at that size. But we thought we could go again, and we got the third location. And that's where it all started to go quite pear-shaped, to be honest with you. It was it was a new unit in the city centre of Nottingham, beautiful location, empty site, so no customers, no equipment. So we got this location, we had to get a loan to fill it with the equipment, we had to employ the staff, we had to find the customers. And we were still trying to work on this sort of just graft mentality, and as long as you're good with customers, good with people, and you're a hard worker, it will all be absolutely fine. We were very wrong with that. And for those that I know I've told this story quite a few times, so I apologize to people who have heard this, but for those that haven't listened, this is really the start of where my obsession with analysing data and finances really stems from this experience. So we get this third location, we very quickly run into cash flow problems. I am now doing the accounts and the books, and I am using the bank balance as a measure of how well we're actually performing. And I'm using sales as a metric as well. So sales are growing and we've got cash in the bank. So everything must be fine, right? About 6 months after we opened that location, it became incredibly apparent that, we're in some serious financial trouble now. I can still vividly remember sitting there at my desk doing the month-end sort of accountancy procedures and realizing we can't pay the suppliers. And I'm not even, we're used to juggling the suppliers around and picking which suppliers to pay first. We've done that forever. That was comfortable, but this was a different ballgame. We can't pay suppliers now. And that was compounded by the VAT upcoming as well. So, it was proper crisis moment. That was, it was from seemingly a really successful business to actually we're pretty close to losing all of this now. And my dad having to start pouring personal finances back into the business to pay the VAT. We had to extend the overdraft and all of that sort of stuff. So it was a pretty rough time.
Who was with you then, Alex, in that sort of crisis team? Then it was a family business. So you and Dad were managing the 3 sites at that stage. Was there anybody else involved from the family front? Was it you guys? Yeah,
there was. So there was a real key appointment, actually. So we ended up employing who's now our operations director during this period of time. And he came from sort of a dealer background. So he's Mercedes thoroughly trained, very, very, very good customer service. But also what we were doing previous to him joining was grossly undervaluing ourselves. And I see this problem a lot in other businesses, is that the garages are giving too much away for free. They're not charging enough. They're doing too much trade work. They don't want to let down their trade friends, so they tend to prioritize the trade work. Now, that was us to a T. We were giving so much away because we thought pleasing the customer was so important that meant that we can't charge proper money. This chap came in and just completely changed the game. And as much pain as it was for us to go through, because it just felt so unnatural to us to actually start charging more for the time that we're spending on vehicles. And the classic was, if we've told a customer it's an hour, but the job goes wrong, we would swallow everything. Whereas this guy had the communication skills to actually get it over the line to the customer that, no, we need more time, and this is the reason why. And it's not our fault. This, and it explained to the customer very thoroughly the procedures that we're going through that require the more time. And that was really game changing to us, to be honest with you. And then there was another director who had been with us from sort of day one. I mean, he was at the company before I was at the company. So there's 4 company directors at this point. And I was a branch manager. The ops director was a branch manager, and the other director. So there's 3 branch managers who are all also directors at this point. And I would estimate about 25 staff, roughly.
Right.
Something along those lines. So we are growing quickly, and but it's very chaotic growth at this point.
Yeah. So Dad then had to reach in to put in cash injection then to ensure that the business made it past that month end, and then was it right? Emergency planning. We've survived. There was a near miss, I suppose you could say. What was the next step then? How did you commence your journey? So it was a case of, this isn't working, and the evidence of it not working was the fact that you'd had this cash flow crisis, and then was there an epiphany? Was it a slow burn? Was it right? Okay, let's get the whiteboards out. Let's analyze what went wrong and project forward how that's not going to happen. How did you actually tackle that conundrum?
So during this period of time, I had been teaching myself bookkeeping. So at this point, I was a good bookkeeper at this point. And I was sort of walking down the accountancy path. So I had quite a fundamental understanding of a profit and loss. But a profit and loss is very hard to produce, and it's delayed. So if you're talking about a profit and loss which is actually useful to the business owner, there has to be accruals and deferrals and all sorts of things in there that actually make it a valid profit and loss, right? So and that was what I didn't have time to do, even though I understood the importance of it. So it was, how can we understand on a daily basis what a good day actually looks like in the business and not bury our heads? So you kind of have this sort of gut instinct that something isn't right. You don't feel like you're performing well enough, but it's not tangible. So it's easy to sort of ignore. But I wanted to make it so we can't ignore it. And a bad day is a bad day and a good day is a good day. But we have to understand this daily now. So we started, and these timings are quite loose. So I can't remember exactly about when we did this, but during this period, we'd end up switching to MAM AutoWorks, but not the AutoWorks that everybody knows. There is a product called AutoWorks Enterprise, which was a multi-location, purpose-built multi-location product. And it served its purpose for multi-location. And we were using a reporting software called Focus. I think it was called Focus, which allowed us to extract the data out of AutoWorks Enterprise into this product and essentially gave us a gross profit figure. And the gross profit figure was immediate. Well, it wasn't immediate, actually. It was at the end of each day. So we'd come in the morning, we'd know what gross profit we achieved over all 3 sites at the end, in the following morning.
Yeah.
And we'd done enough analysis now at these points. And I still have the original Google spreadsheets where I did this analysis to actually understand, okay, so what is it on a daily basis that we actually need in terms of gross profit across these branches? It's way slicker today, but it really did serve a purpose back then. And it was the foundation of exactly how we're doing it to this day. Now, that was completely game changing because all of a sudden there is no hiding from a bad day. And we actually, if you start changing stuff in the business, however that looks, but you've got nothing to actually gauge the results of the change on, then you're just running on gut instinct. So there were countless changes across the business to get us out of this period, but the biggest change was actually allowing us to know if those changes were good or they were bad. So that really set us on the trajectory to recovery from that point. It wasn't the only tough period, but that was a real crisis talk. I actually had to get the directors in because they were unaware of this as well. It was all on my shoulders. This was my responsibility that I'd got completely wrong. And fortunately, my dad was there to basically bail the company out, paid the VAT on personal credit cards, etc., which you can imagine the sort of stress levels. So yeah, that was really where it all sort of turned a corner for us.
Yeah, no, you mentioned something really interesting there, the sort of closed loop. So decision making in all sorts of places has to have a closed loop. So, it's the action and it's then the feedback from the action. Was it successful or not? And some of our listeners that are mechanically minded will think about things like, how the fueling of a car works, that you have a set point, you execute that, then you have feedback about was that positive or was it negative, and then you go back and change that set point. And I think, from a business perspective, a lot of our listeners are mechanically minded and maybe not business minded, but that feedback loop to the machine or the engine of your business is absolutely critical. And as you say, otherwise it's gut instinct and feelings, and you think and you believe. And we have a saying here that in God we trust, everybody else must bring data. Because because it's all about feelings and thoughts, and they don't cut the mustard. And when there is a shortfall, as you say, it must have been horrendous. And my God, to survive it, to survive that experience, and to get, the philosophical side says to survive the experience and to turn that into a benefiting experience and prospering going forward. It's a lesson, and a very expensive and very, very stressful lesson. But it's amazing to hear how you were able to turn that around and then to invoke, a process and a policy. I guess, where a lot of businesses sort of struggle is having the creativity. I'll rewind and say accountants are boring. So, accountancy and accountants is all very menial and very trivial. And people, I was in a chat over the weekend about people paying their accountant and complaining that the fees had gone up. And as it transpired, they're basically using them as a glorified bookkeeper. So somebody to enter the receipts and somebody to take care of the ins and the outs. But what about the benefits, the accountant and their expertise that they've got? I said it's a bit like you're using a Ferrari to go shopping in. It's the wrong tool for that job. That you maybe need a bookkeeper who can manage administration, and then your accountant should give you a vision and some steps towards having a brighter future. And it sounds like your transition then into the accountancy route, with a great sound background knowledge of the business, happened almost the planets aligned, that you had that, the benefit of that training and wisdom to be able to see that. So, and I mean, absolutely hats off to implement then your daily profit number. It gives you that measure, I guess, that says, there's probably a magic number that, bad days happen because real life isn't predictable. And it's really about stopping a run of bad days. And where you are managing multiple sites with multiple bad days that can happen together, visibility, I know, across sites, it becomes the plate juggling, doesn't it? You're spinning plates. You've now got a dynamic machine that's got lots of variables in it, and you're trying to maybe achieve that goal. And without, as you say, without having the measure, how do you know that you've achieved it?
Well, the swing. See, I mentioned earlier that we weren't afraid of graft and working hard, and that really was our response to any cash flow problem. But the bigger the stakes, sort of the bigger the swings are, and you can't. There gets a point in business where working hard genuinely no longer actually helps, and it can actually make the problem worse. And that is really what we've started to experience. I really like your point on accountants, by the way. So I just want to focus on that. So a grossly undervalued occupation in our industry. I've been very lucky that my time with Garage Hive, I've met a lot of accountants, because the journey in transitioning to Garage Hive is one that has to include an accountant as well. And some of them are absolutely brilliant, as in they are very proactive in the business. They almost act as this sort of non-exec or almost like a finance director. Genuinely some brilliant people in that industry. Equal measures of really poor as well. So I've come across some accountants that are so against Garage Hive because they don't want change for the business, and that they're almost prioritizing their work over the needs of their customer. So it's a polarizing industry, and I think the point I'm trying to make is, if you don't feel like your accountant adds value to your business, find another accountant, because there are some really good accountants out there that are now adding value to business. And if you think about the garage business, what separates you from your neighboring garage's sort of value? You will go out your way to help your customer, or, you might serve that nice cup of coffee, or all the obvious things. Well, accountants are exactly the same. There are some that add value to your business, and there are even some that will drag you down. So if you don't feel content with your accountant, go look for a good one, and I promise you'll be happy to pay them probably more than you're paying now for your accountant.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's about value, isn't it? I get the feeling, and it's a barometer based on a random sample, that historically people don't change the accountant because it's a historical thing, and maybe that's I think people not shining a light on their own lack of management skills or awareness about where that, how you can leverage. I myself hooked up, and I've had several along the way, mentors. So the mentor scheme, which can help you ask the questions you don't have time to think about yourself, can shine a light on areas in your own business, even if they're not particularly aware of your business. And I found the mentorship scheme informal from a local business enterprise agency, hooked us up with several mentors who were able to ask questions that I personally sort of knew I didn't know the answers to, and that made me dig in and find that out. And the accountant's relationship in that was also very critical in terms of, we use our accountant to help with some ideas that we may have for the business, and also for their best practice, and to get a barometer, again, if they're doing similar businesses, to benchmarking. So where you're in, how do you benchmark if you're any good or not? So you can look at your gross profit, you can work very hard, you can have excellent customer reviews and ratings. But a business, when all said and done, is a machine essentially made up of people that processes demands on one side and executes service delivery in the middle, and churns out a profit at the end. And I think the efficiency of that machine, as you said, working harder, feeding more stuff at the front end, if the machine is completely inefficient, it's going to end up in a bigger car crash at the back end. And I think where the accountant can help, garages particularly, good accountants can see that, because I think they have a non-emotional view about the efficiency of your machine. And it's very difficult for people, and you yourself, the emotions tied up when the business in those early stages hit a bit of a chunk, because you take it not as a personal affront, but it's your baby, it's your thing that you've built, and there's the emotional tie to this. Isn't just a business, it's my life, it's my future, it's my thing I've built. And there's a really interesting psychology that actually separating the business owner, and you touched upon it there about the accountant, actually, the psychology of the accountant not wanting to change because that means extra work, the psychology of the garage owner not wanting to change to annoy the accountant, or them not being aware. There's lots of things. If you don't do anything, it's a very natural position to take when action has to happen. And that's when my own personal experience found that the mentor coming in with no axe to grind could do a snapshot of the business and go, right, here are some things to think about. And they never gave advice, but they asked some really cool questions that got you thinking about stuff. So I'd agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, brilliant. So shall I carry on the story? We're about halfway through. So that 2014 to 2016 was probably the steepest improvement in business process that we've been through, because of those financial difficulties and just opening a new location, empty location. So we were approached again by another business owner who wanted to sell, and this was a cracking little unit in a really nice area in Nottingham, right next to the Nottingham Forest ground. For any football fans, it is literally next door to the Forest ground. You can see it on TV sometimes, which is pretty cool. And we all of the lessons we'd learned, we'd put into this place. So we made sure that we employed a manager before we opened, which was, I know that sounds really obvious, but that was something we hadn't previously done. And this manager was in the business for a good few months, learning the way of the business and the culture of the business before going into this new location. We had full financial plan. We understood the targets. We knew what we had to achieve from day one. We still made a mistake, though, in that we decided to refurbish the office after we opened, which, again, is another lesson learned, but you can't learn all the lessons at the same time. So that branch was a great success, and it is from the day we opened it to now, it's been a tremendous success. Moving on again, another 2 years, we got approached again by another local garage in a nice area in Nottingham. Exactly the same story, except the learnings were better. Yet again, everything we'd learned, we'd applied into opening this new site. The rest of the business is ticking over quite nicely. It's not super profitable at this point, but we're still, growth, marketing, reinvestment, etc. There are a lot of losses within that as well, and then the investment obviously takes a lot of cash. But this is where everything changed. So in 2018, we opened our 5th branch. And leading up to opening this 5th branch, I met Ray, who's the managing director of Garage Hive. So it was actually an IGA event that I was at in 2017, where there was a guy there stood with a banner about garage management systems, and on the banner was tech efficiency and measuring bits and bobs. And at this point, I'm still living in my completely own world, blinkers on, not in any industry forums, don't talk to any other business owners. So the RMI, that was like the one event where I'd rub shoulders with other garage owners. I don't know if you've been to one, it's like an hour event where there's not much networking.
Yeah.
Anyway, this chap stood there with a banner, and I was like, I started to well, that's interesting. So went back to the garage, did some research on it, and started to, what's tech efficiency? What's these things why can't our system measure these things? Anyway, cut a really long story short and cut that period out. I ended up inquiring with Garage Hive. So Garage Hive wasn't the system that was at this event, but they were just another system that I'd now, doing my research, I'd come across. And it was evidently a very young business at this point in time. And I inquired online, and it just so happened. So Ray Dilson's the managing director of Garage Hive, lives in Riga in Latvia. But this was the 1 week that he was in England. And he was in, I think we got quite a funny story. I think he was in Manchester, and I emailed him, and the next day he's in Nottingham. So it was like, you talk about fate, So he sits there and he demos me this beautifully complicated system. And my dad is also there as well. And he demos this system, a very clearly unfinished system, but with lots of promise. And then he demoed me Power BI. So, but it's funny because the Power BI was like a 2-minute part of the demo, but that was like, right, okay, so Power BI, I mean, this was going back, 5-6 years ago now. Power BI today is, everybody knows what Power BI is. Most people know what Power BI is in business. This was right in the early days. But essentially what I took from that demo was that this is a garage management system, and this is Power BI, and they talk to each other. So whatever we do in here, we can visualize here. So I was like, right, anyway, Ray left, and my dad was like, well, we're not using that one, because it just blew his mind, and it was unfinished, it was complicated, but the foundations I saw was so beautiful, and it was like, if we can get this working, then it's going to change the game. And thankfully, and I know you've spoken previous podcasts about family business, and that family business is tough, but the one thing that my dad's allowed me to do is make my mistakes, and he's given me autonomy, and he's given me sort of the ability to make these sorts of decisions. And he did, bear in mind, I'd spent days and days and days perfecting what we are now on this system with this reporting platform and these figures, and it all was working very nice. Because then, all right, I want to rip this up again and start again, knowing what I'd learned. So yeah, and he reluctantly agreed to, right, it's on you, you do it, that's fine. Went and told Ray we want to sign up, and then we spent about 9 months developing Garage Hive together. So we had a Google Excel, a Google Docs spreadsheet. Still got the spreadsheet, which is really cool, and it is just bullet points of things that the system's missing, and then Ray would just highlight them in green when he's developed them. So he is literally developing 7 days a week, just flying through getting these features built into Garage Hive. These are just fundamental things that we need to use Garage Hive. And he succeeded. And then the month we went live with the 5th branch was the month we went live with the Garage Hive pilot. So it was, right, we've got in parallel these two trains running. And I was at this branch, and we were still running auto work, and we had Garage Hive as a pilot. So every night I had to take all the invoices home from Garage Hive and then put them all onto auto work. It was my job. Yeah, you can imagine, not particularly pleasant evening job, but completely necessary, because if it didn't work out for Garage Hive, then we can't lose that month's data, and we're still using AutoWorks for accountancy. Anyway, it was obviously a success, and now we're measuring time, which we'd never measured before. So we know how long the technicians are at work, who's available, how long they're clocked onto jobs, how many hours they're selling. It was just like this abundance of information. What do we do with all this information? And then that's when my journey in Power BI started. So now I've got to learn how to build reports in Power BI using data from web services straight from Garage Hive. So another really big learning curve. But that was the real game changer for Lindley's was from that point.
So that was the micro level of detail that you could get to now from the system that gave you the option. Although you didn't know what to do with it now, you had, back to the efficiency of the machine, you could measure all points in that process of customer arriving to profit being derived. You had visibility, I guess you could say, from that system.
It was. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, sorry, yeah. And the ability then to report on that. So not only were you capturing it on one hand, you had the ability to manipulate or report on the data on the other, and that gave you that visibility that was necessary.
Well, it was two things. It was if it was entered into Garage Hive, it can be built into some sort of beautiful report. But now it's almost immediately of it. So previously we were waiting overnight. Now it's every half an hour. So it was, and it was an app on your phone. So it had gone from like this spreadsheet on a PC to an app on your phone every half an hour. So it's like a huge leap in technology. It was, and the ability to distribute that information amongst other members of staff was also a game changer. So previously we were building financial reports, whereas now we're building performance reports based on who needs to see that information, essentially. So yeah, it was the immediacy, but also the how accessible the data was to all members of staff, which were the two key changes for us. Key changes,
yeah, that was interesting. And how was that relationship then? It sounds that you hit with Ray then at a convenient moment for both of you. You were at a converging point in your journeys, relatively speaking. Was it brave then that Ray saw the potential in what you were proposing for his product? So there was a sort of, you both had a lot to lose and also win from that relationship, I guess. In that early days, you're coming on board as a customer with a number of sites. He's got a garage management business that's new and young. How did that relationship flourish? What were the key? When you meet somebody, generally you're either mustard or what's the other one? Marmite. You get on or you don't get on. What was it that got you guys engaged at that level to think, okay, there is a sustainable long-term relationship here that could work well for both of us?
Well, to start with, it was just the ultimate professional. He's got a very, very good background. He's highly educated with a very good business background, and he's very professional. So to start with, it was just, this guy's someone good to deal with. He's very, very clever. He knows exactly what he's talking about. He seems good for his word, and his background is, so just to give a bit of context, he worked for a company called Elva, and they installed dealer management systems globally. So he was like one of the senior developers in that team. So his experience is vast, but at the dealership level. And his theory was he doesn't want to travel the world anymore. I mean, he was in his 30s, he's settling down with a family, and he was out the country, every single month. So he wanted to create a repeatable product that he could focus on a single market. And then what we know as SaaS today, which is software as a service today, that was his sort of vision back then. So that's how it started. But then because the development was so intense, and the way we were suggesting features weren't just make this happen. It was, we kind of have an understanding of how the software is put together, and we were helping design the product as well. And I think Ray enjoyed that level of interaction. And I'm not exaggerating when I say we had 6 a.m. meetings every day for months on end. And just by spending that much time with somebody, of course, you get to know that somebody, and you get to know them very well. And, by the end of the 9 months, me and Ray had become friends. We'd been out to Riga. So before we signed up, we flew out to Riga. Remember sat on the Ryanair flight with my dad and Alex Gilbert, one of the other directors. And it was, this is our first international business trip, which was quite a cool, nice. Quite a cool moment in business. So we flew out to Riga and we met Ray out there, and we met some of the other shareholders out there. So we just very quickly became friends, and it's lucky that we got on personally as well. We both, during this very early period in Garage Hive's life as well, we both had our first child. So we both had daughters that are very similar age. So there was just a lot in common with both of our careers, and we became good friends, and still really good friends to today.
Amazing. And so that took you then running the systems parallel in branch number 5, along with Garage Hive, to make sure, you didn't lose visibility of running the business also, but it gave you the ability to stress test the newly developed system in terms of, what you had going on there. And so that parallel utilization went on to see, I suppose it flushed out any gaps also. So what do we get from here that we don't get from there? A question, if it's not contentious, then obviously you must have had some conversations with your existing management supplier about your needs and desires as a business. Were they coming across that was what you were trying to achieve wasn't necessarily possible, or they didn't think it was the right thing for them to do? Or was there a reason why you switched, and then almost to the outsider it looks like you took a big risk with a brand new business in your own business then that had potentially, you knew the value of that reporting. It was a bit of a gamble, I would say, or an educated, calculated risk to go from a supplier to a new supplier. What were the thoughts behind that?
It was a big gamble, and there were issues with the previous system, but they were not your normal issues. So if you remember earlier, I said we were on a version called Enterprise. So AutoWorks is a good product. It serves a really good purpose for a particular type of business. But we were a multi-location, complicated business to run. Yeah. And they had this product called Enterprise, which on the face of it looks the same as AutoWork Online. But behind the scenes, it's a totally different business. A totally different product. So what was really frustrating me was not only were they not developing some of the requests that we had, and they were quite simple, they were separate products. So I'm seeing AutoWork Online develop and change and actually get all these new features. Yeah. But AutoWork Enterprise was not moving at all.
Oh my gosh,
so it was a double problem. It was they're not developing what I want, but also they're developing their sister product, which is now infinitely better than one that we had. So the system that we left is not what people know as AutoWork Online today. It was a completely different version. So it was just that had fallen so far behind for us, unfortunately. So it was a big risk, but something just felt right. We could have taken a less risky route and gone with a more established management system, which was already sort of getting a grip of the UK market. But this just felt more fun. It just felt cooler. And I've always been a bit of a geek, and I've always been into computers and software, and always liked playing computer games and stuff. And the thought of being able to actually shape our own product with someone who was very receptive to our ideas was just great fun. There's no other way of putting it. It was very good fun. But yeah, it was a risk, but it felt calculated.
Yes. Yeah, and you were with a good partner. So back to that, people, working with people, if you find you've got that whatever it is, the magic chi that makes you both be on the same wavelength, so to speak, that you knew you had the option, that it was going to end up in a good place, even though it might, be more harder work. You were going to end up with a better product that really suited your own needs. Yeah, no, good stuff. And so the development then for the 9 months when you were running it with Site 5, that came to a point when was the point then, Alex, that you said, okay, this is now working? And how did the transition, because I know it's an often mentioned challenge for people in a situation where they're running a garage management system to transition to another. So how did your own journey go with your own enterprise back when you were running those businesses? How did you what were the key decision factors to say, okay, we're right? And more so than, how did you achieve that without business interruption?
Well, the key decision factor was I don't want to double entry anymore. So that was very, very painful to do that. So we actually ended up only running the pilot for 1 month. So then we very quickly had to start planning, right, how do we roll this out across 5, or it would have been 4 additional locations in one go overnight. So we turned the head office into like a classroom. We had multiple classroom sessions with the front of house staff and the technicians. And it was just sort of an all hands on deck, really positive mentality from all the staff, sort of like, right, let's do this. Everybody was really bought in to making this change.
So you set the classroom up, really positive can-do mental attitude, and the guys, you split for a second there. So you'd all got together in the classroom, and you were doing the training. So in the prep for the 4 sites to come on board.
Yeah. So we got everybody into a classroom, and we were doing classroom training, and like I said, a very, very positive attitude from all the members of staff, and that really helps when you're going through change. If you've got sort of staff buy-in. And at the night before, so just again to give people more context, Garage Hive at this point had 1 member of staff. So there was no support team, there was no implementation team, there was no sales team. It was Ray on his own. Now we had a big company behind him, a very big company behind him that he could sort of lean on if he needed to, but there was nobody really to guide us through the change. We were kind of learning on as we go, which makes it sound even more crazy. But yeah, we stayed late the night before. We had about 8 members of staff in. We ordered pizzas, and the night before we started to do the data transfer. So all the bookings, all the jobs, all the parts, everything then went over to the new system. And I don't know, we probably ended up leaving about midnight. Everybody went home. Everybody came in the next day, and I was like, right, let's go, hit the ground running and just see what happens. And it was a success, but it was very, very, very tough back then. And bear in mind, tough for multiple reasons. I am the only person that can help with any issues. There were still features missing. So we're now, in a month's worth of testing with one person testing the system in a particular way is not a very good way to test a piece of software. We're now attacking this product from all angles and finding problems with it. And yeah, you can imagine the sort of stresses that brought onto the business. And again, just to the extent of I had a holiday booked, a skiing holiday booked that I had to cancel because there was that much pressure on the business to get this over the line, really. And if I'm away, no one can help. So it was, yeah. So there are, as always in business, there were sacrifices that needed to be made, but we got there in the end.
Gosh, yeah, it sounds very brave. That whole implementation part of changing and transitioning a system is, as you know, you must have helped lots of garages through that now that have come away from another system. That there is the moment of truth where you switch from one to the other. But the preparation is absolutely key, isn't it? So making sure that and again, you raise a really interesting point there about software development, that the way that you're using it is the way that suits you. But if you put somebody else in front of it, we find a little bit with the software we've got where they're pressing the forward button 4 times and then it crashes, but you don't actually do that because to push and wait, and then you don't find those small insignificant glitches as they see, but they're driving somebody who's under pressure up as that's a showstopper. And you're going, well, no, if you just pause a second, it will work. I can only imagine across multiple sites now, the business is kicking on as per normal. People are turning up with broken cars, work in progress, technicians needing jobs and feeding in invoicing need doing, and somewhere along the line something doesn't work. It must have been, you said it very lightly there, but I can only imagine the immense stress that must have caused during that period. How long did the transition take then, Alex? What sort of, where would you say that you got from, we're switching over on a Monday? When did it sort of calm down and you thought, okay, right, this is sort of actually, this is working, this is going to work? Because I suppose at that stage you're still going, in your heart of hearts, you could go, this might not work. This may not make it. Well, when was your sigh of relief moment? So how long was the transition that you went, oh,
well, it is funny you say that. And, I must have deep down thought that there's still risk of failure. But during the transition period, we ended up investing in Garage Hive, so it had to work. There wasn't really a choice. I would say it got a bit easier as time passed by. I can't remember the exact time periods, but I can remember in those early days throwing around the 3-month sort of period is when you will start to become a natural at the way the product works and you start to feel the benefits. That timeline has come down as there's significantly more support. There's way better training and the product's just more intuitive than it was back then. But yeah, I would probably estimate about 3 months before we were like, yeah, okay, we've made a really good decision here. But it was probably in a similar sort of timescale in which the relationship with me and Ray developed so much so that it was, right, now this is over. It doesn't feel like it should be over. We feel like we should carry on this relationship. And all sorts of theories got banded around, like, do we do some consultation for Garage Hive? Do we act as sort of sales for Garage Hive? And ultimately, we saw so much promise in the product. And this Power BI thing was the real key thing for us was we should invest in this. Like, we can't afford to invest, but we really should invest because this could go somewhere special. So that conversation got raised. I tentatively raised the conversation and everybody was on board. And then there was quite a lot of negotiations involved, but ultimately we came to a good deal that we were all very happy with. But to make it even more complicated than it needed to be, because we were the only proper sized garage using Garage Hive, everybody wanted to come and see us using Garage Hive, because it was out there in the market, but there was no one to demo it. So all of a sudden I'm getting garage owners coming to us to see Garage Hive. So now I'm starting to meet other garage owners, and this is where it's like we then start entering the world of actually this is a great industry if you get yourselves out there and get involved in the forums. There are some cracking people in the industry, and the likes of like Mark Webb and Nigel Yardley, and these people. These were the first people that I actually ended up demoing Garage Hive to. Mark Kettle. Nev from Neville Fix It, lots of familiar names in the industry. These were like some of the first people through the doors. So I was introduced quite quickly to some pretty cool people in the industry. I'm still really good friends with today. But the investment was like a silent investment, but we very quickly learned that was just not going to be the case. We are going to be very active.
Involved.
So we start selling Garage Hive, and then guess what? You sell it. Well, someone needs to implement it. So then we start implementing it, and then you've implemented it. So now someone needs to support it. So very quickly we had to build a business around, right, this is what's coming. And then my career in Lindley's then really split off. Even though during this period, I was made managing director of Lindley's Auto Centres in the same year as well, was probably the year that I just had my first child. I'd just been made managing director, and now Garage Hive is just starting to take off. So it was a very, very tricky year, very interesting year.
Yeah, amazing story. And so how did you find the transition then? So from going from being a mechanic technician into a branch manager, towards then running the bigger Lindley's business, and all of a sudden then you've gone accountancy. So I'm now building my expertise with knowing my numbers and being able to, effect that as a role in my day to day. And then all of a sudden you're into the software. So now you're software house or front of house for software house, and you've got support to run, which is sort of different. You've now got implementation, you've got training, you've probably got a team of working with customers who want to implement it, thinking if they're the right people, if it's the system's right for them. So now you've got to build a brand new business, which is, essentially the beginnings of Garage Hive. What were I can only imagine, but what were some of the significant challenges in that period then, Alex?
So there were still things in Lindley's that I was responsible for. So accounting was one of them. I imagine with 5 location business, there's a lot of financial work to do. So this Sunday was my day of doing accountancy. Did that for, I don't know, possibly 6 months to a year, every Sunday sitting down doing the accounts. So the minute we made the investment, or we were proposing to make the investment, was when we then rang our old accountant. So we had a fantastic accountant, and we always had this fantasy of employing him. It was like mine and my dad's. Imagine employing your accountant. Like, that's cool, isn't it? So we always had this and he ended up getting poached. Oh. So he ended up joining another client. So fast forward a year, we kept in touch because we were friends at this point, but just rang him out of the blue, and I said, look, if this is happening and I need somebody really to replace my responsibilities in Lindley's, and everything that I learned about accountancy, really, I learned from you. And I never dared approach him when he was working for the accountancy firm, because it feels a bit dirty, like it feels a bit wrong. Yeah. But when he's left, it's like, right, fair game now. So I rang him up, and really, fortunately for us, he was interested straight away. So explained the offer to him, explained where we were. So he joined the business as the finance director, which was a chartered accountant, now as a finance director in the business, which was a real big sort of step forward in the business. He took over from what I was doing and did it 10 times better than what I was doing, because it was his focus, and he's obviously much more qualified in that area than I was, which was a big step forward for Lindley's. But then my attention then turned to Garage Hive significantly. So we're talking probably for a year or two, 90% of my time was in Garage Hive, and we'd sold a few installs, I guess you'd call it, sold a few versions of Garage Hive to various garages. And I can still remember, right, okay, so now I've got to go into another business and teach them how to use Garage Hive. And I'm not even sure if it's going to work for them. I don't know. I've got to speak to a load of people I've never met before, manage them through change. And it was Nigel, it was Yardley's garage. So I've got very fond memories of that business. And they were absolutely brilliant, and they're really nice people. So they actually made it probably a lot easier for me than the reality of the situation was. But yeah, you feel, that imposter syndrome. It was like, what on earth am I? I remember pulling up outside the garage, like, what am I about to do? Why am I doing this? You just want to go back to your business with your tail between your legs and just crack on with what you always know.
Yeah.
That was the start of it. And then that install was a success, you would call it, but there was a lot of support afterwards, which we then started to do through WhatsApp. So then my phone then became support through WhatsApp, which sounds really unprofessional and primitive, but it's so quick and so easy to use, and voice notes and videos and everything. So it did actually work really well. And then I did that on my own for probably a year, selling, implementing, supporting, traveling the country. So I was all around the country for every 2 to 4 weeks. I'm in a different city, installing Garage Hive in a different business. And then it got to the point where it was, I remember one day I had a particularly tough install. And by the time I'd got to the end of the day, I had something like 1,200 WhatsApp messages on my phone to deal with. And it was like, right, we've got to start scaling up. So, and then Dawn enters the story. So Dawn now runs the entire operation, the UK operation. So she was one of our branch managers who took a natural liking to Garage Hive, and she ended up being Lindley's support. So they would go to her. So she transitioned very easily into helping Garage Hive grow. And from then on, it was just, we would grow a bit more, we employ another person, and grow a bit more, employ another person. I think Garage Hive's now up to 16 or 17 staff now. So it's growing. Obviously that growth curve is quite exponential now. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, amazing. That is amazing. So yeah, a huge transition, but yeah, it's a very interesting story again of the I'm not going to say solopreneur, but you know, taking that role on, it's become a new business, and you are all things to all men. You're doing the support and the sales and the installation, where you've got to always get to the point, haven't you, in terms of you end up doing 2 full-time jobs, or one and 3/4 before you can employ the next person to take on some of that burden, and then there's 2 3/4 jobs between 2 of you, and then 4 jobs between 3, and that growth. Yeah, that great. It's amazing. I think when people come, I often think people that in a normal job can never fathom how self-employed people are driven to work 60, 70, 80, 90 hours a week to make it a success. And actually what gumption it takes and what dedication is involved in achieving your goals and ambitions. And yeah, it's easy for people to look at the end when you get to a point of sort of semi-success to go, it must be easy, ... for you, because you're self-employed, and you've painted a really, really strong picture there of actually, it's never easy, but it is worth it. And dedication to the cause to achieve your goals will, deliver huge benefits. And it's an amazing story to get you to that point so far.
And I think it's worth going a bit more at that, as well as if you are starting up on your own, time. There's a lot to be said about work-life balance, and it is really important. And it's definitely a focus for me now, is making sure that I have some sort of work-life balance, because it has been absolutely terrible. But when you're starting out and you have competition, the only thing that you have is time. And if you work double the amount of time that they're working, then it's very clearly a benefit. And it was 7 days. It was quite literally 7 days a week for a year. And same for Ray as well. It was a very common site that I would do an install. There'd be a problem, and Ray would work through the night to fix the problem, and then we'd come in the next day and the problem's fixed. That was just common. That was just routine, and it became this sort of like thing for Garage Hive. Was we were so quick at developing, and it was all thanks to Ray really putting in the graft. And anybody starting out alone, or I know we're going to get onto the conversation of starting up a business, but I do think that whilst work-life balance is important, there are sacrifices to be made, and putting that extra time in is just completely necessary. There's no avoiding it.
No, there is no avoiding it. I think it's a really relevant point, Alex. I think timing comes into a lot of that as well, where in an ideal world, you would be able to time it where the impact of external factors, family life and new children, as you described, come along on the scene. But there is no ever an ideal time to do it. There is just a time to do it. The planets align, and you have to see that through. But I guess we face it quite a lot in our own industry, where the journey into self-employment for technicians, for instance, is often working for somebody else and then deciding that they'd like to do it for themselves and to set out in their own business. I guess, for me, and I'd love to have the conversation really. For me, I read a book a long, long time ago, and I think it's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Really, really interesting book, written loads and loads of times before. And one of the lessons that kept whacking me up the side of the head in the various endeavors I've been involved with was begin with the end in mind. And one of the habits is begin with the end in mind. And I often get the feeling when we talk to technicians who are in a business and they've gone on their own and they're sort of struggling, that the planning part of it, however that looks, is often seen as boring, a bit like accountancy. I see that as boring. Really, I want to be fixing cars and I want to be in my own garage, and maybe underestimating the time it takes to plan to do that effectively. If we put the focus into a small one-man band going on his own, we've talked about the absolute criticality of having an idea of the numbers in your business. What sort of tips would you give or be able to share, or what are your insights into owner manager starting or in a smaller business developing? What sort of things should, maybe full-blown system is on his agenda, but what sort of things could they be doing to make their life easier in the early stages, do you think, Alex?
Well, for me, it's to be honest with you, it applies from a one-man band all the way up to 10 branches, which is where we're at. And a one-man band, it's going to be slightly easier, I guess, because you're at that stage I mentioned earlier where you can just graft your way out of a problem, and I think that applies. The smaller you are, the more you can just work harder to get out of the problem. But let's say you're a one-man band and you open up a location that's got high rent and your training costs are high, and you like you like to invest in all the latest tools, etc. If you don't have an idea on how much that's going to be costing you each month, then it doesn't matter how hard you work, you may not actually be able to make a profit. So, and then you end up with this feeling where you feel like you're constantly swimming upstream and you're not getting anywhere and you're not achieving anything. And again, that applies to a 3-man garage, 5, 10, 20 people on a single location, right? So for me, it is just understand exactly what your costs are and what your predicted costs are for the next 12 months. And I've talked this subject to death, and I've done lots of videos on exactly how to do this task. But there's a spreadsheet which you fill in, you put all your costs in, and it predicts a daily running cost, essentially. So it's what we would call a gross profit target in Garage Hive. And that is essentially what it costs you each day to open those doors. And it's not looking at costs that have gone, it's looking at costs that may be. So for things like, if you've got a unit, there's obviously things like building maintenance. If you take the lads out at Christmas, as the Christmas works do, there's your once a year accountancy bill. So you've got to make sure that all these things are considered. Then you then get a daily cost. And that daily cost could be any figure. But the next step is understanding what your output needs to be to cover those costs. And it may be that you don't have enough technicians. It's probably that your labor rate's not high enough. But there are quite a few factors involved. So I've done this exercise, luckily through Garage, I've done this exercise with lots of businesses. So I've got a broad idea of what looks good and what looks bad. And I've done this exercise with businesses where if they're not selling 95% of their hours, they're losing money. And then, talk about a battle. I mean, and that compounds itself by the business owner just feeling so stressed because they can't progress. No matter what they try and change in their business in terms of increasing efficiency, the setup of the business is just incorrect. So they could apply all the training in the world, they could work as hard as they want, but it's just not going to make a difference. So for me, it is make sure that the output available in your business is enough to cover the costs and pay you what you want out of the business. So if you're a one-man band, you've got to factor in, right? So you say you've got 10 hours a day. 6 of those hours a day, you can be working on a car. The other 4 hours a day are going to be serving customers and business running stuff and admin and etc. So of those 6 hours available, take into account some holidays, etc., can it pay you the wage that you want out of the business? And if it can, or if it can't, then you need to make decisions off the back of that. But I think that everything pivots on knowing your cost. I think it is the fundamental of all business is know what your costs are.
Yeah, know what your costs are. And that's really sage advice. And it's a really good, I think it would be a really good exercise for people who are maybe thinking about setting up on their own, is to do that. If there's only one thing you do, it's to build your cost model to see, and it's often, we hear people are trapped. What they've done essentially by going self-employed is bought them a very low-paying job with a load of commitments that they're signed up to, and it's a very difficult thing to escape, and it can potentially lead to unhappiness and disharmony. But as you've said, if you start with the end in mind by building your business cost model, that then, as you said, you work out the efficiency of the machine, what you need to charge in terms of your sold labor versus the efficiency that you need to be hitting to see whether or not that will pay you better than when you had a proper job. And if the answer is no, then the business model idea that you've got isn't sustainable. And it's really, really sage advice. And of course, I think the second big problem that garages and smaller garages face is that growth bit. So, you mentioned earlier in your conversation there about scaling. So scaling is a very critical thing in your business to grow the business, to process more of what it is that you do, to turn more profit. And if your profit's under the hammer from the start, where does the scaling come from? Where do you find the investment to be able to scale? And this, I think, sometimes is what we would call call, the cul-de-sac, where you're stuck in a position that there's nowhere to go because you can't, without changing the model drastically, which is difficult to do as you're going along in a small business. I think that business plan is absolutely vital. And building your second iteration or your third iteration, I don't know if that's, again, something, when you're looking to expand, you're starting off at point A, business model B. What is it that you've achieved in A that allows you to transition to business model B or to scale that business? And I think that's something, again, that's missing. But the cost of doing business, we'll, if you're happy, we can put a link in the show notes, Alex, to that spreadsheet, if you're happy to share that with the listener.
That'd be brilliant. I'd love that. Yeah. And again, for anybody listening, and if you use that spreadsheet, you could just reach out to me directly. It's free for everybody. You certainly don't need to be using Garage Hive to use the spreadsheet. And I'd love to help you understand it if you struggle. So just reach out directly to me if you want any assistance on it as well.
No, that's brilliant. That's lovely to hear, and I think that could potentially save heartbreak. With just having that under the under control before you start. And I think for me, we often talk about licensing for technicians and how that's going to solve the industry's ills. That in fact, if you had to be licensed, it's going to stop people undercutting other people. It's going to increase the level of sophistication and skills, and the rip-off merchants are going to go. My own personal view is I really believe that business training ought to be in some states. In Australia, for instance, you have to have training before they give you a license to have a business, because somebody's joined the dots up and said, actually, a well-trained potential entrepreneur is going to make less mistakes and have a more successful business. And I think I really buy into that. And until that's going to happen, I think, giving some coaching.
I am really pleased you said that, because and it's quite contentious, but I think there is not enough emphasis on business training, and there's too much emphasis on technical training. Now, I know this. I know what you do is technical training, but this podcast is business oriented, so I'd like to talk about this topic. So, I think that there is a staff shortage, and there are all of the problems that we all know are problems in the industry, and people not charging enough, etc. I'm a bit more blunt when it comes to the reason why there's a staff shortage, and I appreciate that working conditions have to be good, and there has to be career progression for people, etc. And that they are all obvious things that need covering off. But I think that the real blunt problem is that the industry is not paying enough for the technicians because it can't afford to pay enough for the technicians, I think is the real problem. Now, I just imagine back to school, and you're talking, I had friends that left school and went into an electrician's apprenticeship, and, by the age of 23, 24, they're earning like 35, 40,000 pounds. And this is going back 19 odd years. Well, yeah, probably 15 years by this point. No one at school ever had the conversation, I'm going to go and be a mechanic because it's well paid. So, and I don't picture teenagers are having the conversation about, well, they've got a really nice staff room and they've got a pool table. And I don't imagine those conversations. I imagine a lot of those conversations are money oriented at that point. And I think a lot of decisions are made at that point in, these youngsters' lives, these people that we want to come into the industry. So I don't think there's a quick fix. But I do think that as an industry, it is really, I think it's always been undervalued, but it's tremendously undervalued now. When you think about the skill set required of a modern technician is at its peak at the minute. It's significant in the knowledge that they require, yet some people still sell it at £40 an hour. It's just mind blowing. It really is mind blowing. Or we'll have conversation with garages that will charge less for diagnostics than they will for fitting brake pads, etc. So there's this entire piece around business management and value and worth and charging enough money. And I think that is the root cause of the shortage of people entering the industry, because the wages just aren't there for the technicians. And until the entire industry is singing on the same sort of page and trying to better the industry, I don't think we're going to solve that problem, unfortunately. And I work with like the IMI, and I've done work close with the IMI, and I think they're a great organization and they're doing really good things for the industry. But if you look at the business training aspect, it's just lacking. You have some really, really good consultancy in the industry, but there's only a handful that probably I can reel off and you can reel off, and there's 30,000 garages. You need an army of business trainers and consultants out there to sort of raise the profile of the industry. So yeah, it's quite a topic, but I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, no, it is, and we're smack bang in the middle of technical training, and my background is in business, and before I set this business up, I was involved in a business management system in a role of implementing change in businesses. So it's one of those, I'm a bit weird like that, where the technical side is very strong, but my business training also is quite strong. And I see that 100%. Where we get people come on training potentially is they're seeing these shortcomings in their daily life. So they'll have a broken car that they cannot fix, or they have a problem or a series of problems that they're coming up against that they go, we have to have some training because I've been put in this really uncomfortable position by this car or this process, or I have been previously and I don't want to be. But what we don't tend to see, because I think partially it's a visibility about the way they run their businesses, and one of the things that makes me chuckle out loud is in some of the business podcasts I look at and some of the reading I do is the end of year accountancy meeting. We talked about the value of accountants. So many businesses will see their meeting with the accountants as the review of their business. And it's probably the only thing they may do all year about the business. So they get to meeting with the accountants. They go through, in inverted commas, the books, which are generally a few sheets of paper. And the accountant talks about profit, loss and balance sheets. And they nod sagely like they understand. They're too scared even to say, I have no idea what you're talking about. And they've gone, well, Mr. Smith, we're chuffed to say you've made £82,000 profit this year. And the guy sat there sort of rubbing his pockets going, well, where is it then? Because if I've made all this money, where is this money gone? And I think if that is, and it appears to be quite common, that indicates that you're maybe not got a close enough handle on the business that you're running, and your business is running you. You've great thing you're not failing, or you haven't failed because you wouldn't have made it to that point. But your machine isn't efficient. If you're looking at it once a year, how on earth do you know how to make those small adjustments to ensure your profitability? And as you said, if the business isn't profitable, there's no money to pay wages. No money to pay wages, you can't invest in technicians, and the technicians certainly aren't coming to your place if you haven't invested, as you said, in the what we would call nice to have. But I think looking at if we put a job out in the marketplace for a technician, a young technician trying to get somebody from school or college who's got all of the qualifications that they need, how on earth are we competing as an industry? We covered in a previous issue of the podcast about apprentices. The trade is its own advertising banner. How your garage mechanic acts in his life with his peers at the school gates, or at the football club or rugby or wherever it is. Are you advertising a successful business? Are you advertising for a career? Could you get an apprentice to join you? If we look at what's on offer from other companies, it's absolutely no surprise that there is a technician crisis, because garages are running inefficiently. They're not making a big enough profit to support a workforce that is the lifeblood of their business. And it's not a virtuous circle, but it is a circle that's led us to where we are today. Interestingly, looking at symptom and root cause, as I put my diagnostics hat on today. So the symptom is we can't get people, and the root cause is the businesses are inefficient. And we're at a lovely point at the minute where garages have the option. So one of the big problems, I think, I don't know if you agree, Alex, was when we think about garages putting up their prices, they don't understand, as you said, without the understanding of a cost of doing business, what your price needs to be to start with to enable you to have that profit. So they do the comparatization. So I'm looking down the road, either side, let's go 4 garages left, 4 garages right, work out what everyone else is charging, and now I'm going to be the average, because I don't want to be too high because I can't justify I can't sell the benefits of my service, and I'm going to be too low because I'm better than them. So I'm going to be somewhere in the middle, but somewhere in the middle of being wrong without an idea of whether that's turning a profit probably isn't the way to do it. And so how ideally now garages are booking. If we talk about garage industry trends, if we might, about the piece of work you're doing, looking at future bookings, let's say, if I look one of my LinkedIn posts the last 2 weeks, what do future bookings look like on your system for predicting futures?
So the future bookings at the minute, we're going through a bit of a tricky period because the COVID extension is still haunting us. It's been compounded this year by the fact there were 0 new vehicles 3 years ago.
2020.
So it's in the realms of like 2 million vehicles that would have been entering MOT or also not entering MOT. So it's particularly tough. That being said, we're through the worst of it. So it is slowly recovering now. And I would expect the recovery to be probably 6 to 8 weeks before it starts to resume to some sort of normal levels.
But what would be the average garage booking? So what are they for? What jobs have they got in their future queue, let's say, if you looked at that as a metric?
I think it's about 60 odd at the minute, roughly. And what was really interesting was that the future, so the way this works is we take account of their entire future bookings each night. So that is not telling you how many jobs are in the next week or in the next day. It's just in total, what's their future bookings looking like?
Yes.
And we saw 4 weeks of decline before it actually started to impact the daily amount of jobs the garage is doing, which suggest, and we are coming off March, and March is one of the busiest periods. It always has been one of the busiest periods. But it looks like garages did pretty well as an average on managing to keep the amount of work coming through the doors. And interestingly, the average invoice value jumped up the biggest jump yet. So with the lack of work, eventual lack of work, average invoice value increased. And this is, I mean, there is the obvious thing. We're not doing MOTs, so the straightforward pass is not there bringing that average invoice value down. But actually, when you aren't running around like headless chickens and you've actually got a bit of time to breathe and run the business, you've got this phenomena of less is more. And your processes start to improve and your conversations with the customer start to improve. And it is a real thing, is that the garages that end up seeing less work end up charging more money because the service is better. Going back to your whole labor rate thing. So that's really interesting because it's currently sitting at its highest point in the, 7 or 8 months that we've been collecting data, was in the quietest month. Yeah.
It's a quite, and that sort of indicates, if we go back to root cause of garages not charging enough, it isn't because there's a lack of work necessarily. This is about the garage's maybe proposition. There's work to do. Future bookings are there. Being cheapest gets you more work, but it doesn't get you more profit. The back to the education piece then of less is more. If your car count drops, every transaction a business does, there is friction, and that friction can be positive and negative friction, but it requires a level of overhead to manage that. So that's transitioning a customer through your processes, that's making an invoice, that's running it through the workshop, that's managing parking, that's managing parts. So the frequency as it increases, the proportion of friction, if we call it that way, also increases, which means there's less of that person to go around, and the quality may dip. And that's really what you're summarizing there. So with the car count dropping, focusing on the value add, focusing on the profitability, makes businesses more profitable. And there's a really strong lesson in that less is more, and I love it, and that makes a lot of sense. But less is more doesn't mean should link back to being able to charge and have profit to sustain a workforce, because I suppose if we're looking forward to retirement age of mechanics and technicians, those guys leaving the industry, there will come a pinch point where the number of incomers and the number of leavers hits the point where we have seen through COVID, where that leaves a dearth in the middle. That how do you recruit? Well, you poach from somebody else, and that whole vicious cycle of the price spiral upwards because poaching is going on because the volume of people. Eventually, you hit a sweet spot that the only people that can poach garages are technicians from other garages are those garages that are more profitable, and profitability wins the day to sustain the business on an ongoing basis if you take that to its full extent. So
I do feel like this is, and I understand this poaching thing isn't pretty, but I feel like this is just in the economics of our industry, this is just something that we're going to have to go through, and we're going through it. And naturally what happens is the good techs get poached by the good businesses that can afford to poach. They end up with the only ones that got the skill set and the capacity to do the work. So they end up making more profit. And then the garages that are falling behind end up dropping off. And essentially the quality of the industry improves across the board, which raises the standard across everybody. So I understand that poaching is frowned upon because you almost feel like you're not doing your bit for the industry, which is bringing in these apprentices. But I think the broader picture is it's a natural cycle that our industry is currently going through, which we'll all benefit from eventually.
Yeah, it is the cycle of life. It's survival of the fittest, isn't it? It's the Darwinian approach to evolution, and it's a business evolution situation. And I don't think it can be avoided. And as you say, the strongest will survive. And it should be that bit of motivation for a garage that's living in the middle segment of profitability and business efficiency to take a look and go, actually, this is not only have we not got staff in our business, that's a potential risk to the future existence of the business. And it's a big alarm bell, to be able to do something and to make that change. Yeah, it's symptomatic. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Yeah, and how do you find then, with the Lindley's business being at that number of sites, has that presented its own individual challenges to your business in terms of recruitment and retention of team members, technical team members, and also front of house, the most underrated, job in the garage land? Are you finding you're able to manage that?
Yeah, so as we've scaled, when it was a single site, it had that real family feel, everybody's best friends sort of feeling to it, typical small business feel. And obviously, as we've scaled, that's become much more challenging, which is quite sad, really. And it is sad, but it is just the reality of business as you get a bit bigger. So naturally, retention has suffered. Funnily enough, retention at the original sites is a lot higher, but the newer sites where we would have staff joining the business that, they are working for the business and not working for the family. That's been quite a challenge for us, if I'm being really honest. In terms of recruitment, a few years ago, we took the stance, and again, this is quite a contentious point, and I see lots of people struggling to recruit. But I think the biggest mistake they make is they don't put the salary on the job advert. I think that's a fundamental. The problem is when you do that, it makes you look at what the market's worth today and not what you're paying today to the existing staff. So that new tech that you may or may not get may end up costing you significant money because can you put an advert out at X salary without justifying that to your existing team? And we've been through that in Lindley's, and now we've banded the techs, and the techs are all on a level that we're really happy with. It's very competitive in the higher end of what there is on Indeed, but we had to go through a very painful process to get to the ability to now put an advert out with a salary on it, and I think that's a real challenge for garages. And you see, all you got to do is look on Indeed and have a look how many of them say competitive salary instead of an actual salary. And our experience of those competitive salary jobs is not good. You do not get many applications. So that was a challenge for us, and that's something that we've changed and really benefited from. And now we're pretty much fully staffed across the company. We're constantly recruiting, so we've always got adverts out, and we're always looking for good people. But generally speaking, paying enough money normally gets the job done, providing the business is healthy elsewhere. And bear in mind, if people are going to research your business, another thing I think is grossly undervalued is your reviews. If they're considering joining your business and you've got really bad reviews or not very good reviews, or you perhaps reply to the bad reviews in a bit of a contentious way, then you're kind of giving away the sort of business owner that you might be, and that might put someone off working for you as well. So again, a bit more food for thought. And then on your point about, yeah, go on, James, sorry.
I was going to say, really interesting there, Alex, about the reviews. As again, we often see that social proof or social evidence. If you look at digital marketing and how that sits, in terms of people's savviness and awareness, I think there's two really interesting points you made there. Isn't it ironic that the technician knows their worth when the garage owner maybe doesn't? When you're looking at them scouting the market and going, we're now being paid XDX and garage owners are behind that curve going competitive salary. We don't want to mention, because it gives us those issues, like you said, what the existing workforce being paid, and have we scaled up our business model? Looking again, just recently, look at what the average, inflation rate's running at, and have people raise their rates to account for the increased costs of, energy and staffing and parts, and the ongoing delays due to Brexit, or course, whatever, for parts, courtesy cars, costs lifting up. How are they keeping track is just amazing, and it really blows me out of the water. The other one you mentioned there is about reviews, social evidence and social proof. A lot of garage, a lot of potential recruits will scout you out on your social media, and they will check you out if you've got a Facebook page. It hasn't been updated since 2003. If you're running Twitter and you're posting stuff about your, contentious political views or whatever it is, you're just not actively maintaining it. I think technicians see that as, well, are you current in your business? Are you a current business? So therefore, if you don't keep your social media updated, are you likely to have the latest scan tool or the latest technology or the latest training, or you're just you're digitally slightly behind the curve? And again, same as reviews, the low number of reviews or response to reviews is poor. It's an unseen anti-recruitment technique where you're not even with a shout, you're not getting those applications. So it's a really good point. So sorry to interrupt you. That was a really good point. No,
do you just to emphasize on that point as well, the common conversations are that, this company is now paying X amount for these technicians, or these are paying this amount for these technicians. And at the end of the day, those businesses have got to make those salaries pay for their business. So if you're in a position where you feel like that, you feel like you can't compete and you've just given up, and the only way you can get technicians is by that garage being full of technicians, and now you can get the rest, and then perhaps, not always, but perhaps that is an alarm bell that you could perhaps be producing more profit out of the existing workforce that you have. A point that I was going to make was on service advisors. Now, you mentioned that again, and this comes back round really nicely, actually. So service advisors are, if you had a garage full of master techs and a really poor service advisor, you're going to have a really bad business. If you have Ronaldos on that front counter and average technicians and apprentices, you're probably going to have a pretty good business, because they'll just know what you can do and they'll charge accordingly, etc. So you couldn't be any more correct when you said it is the most undervalued position in the business. This is something that really Lindley's learned from other businesses. So we on our journeys around other garages installing Garage Hive, like the best thing that ever happened to Lindley's was the ability to be welcomed into these businesses and shown how they operate. And some of them are just phenomenal businesses. And there was one in particular where I did this install. It was a really good business, and they're now a really good personal friend. But the way that their front of house staff communicated car problems to customers was just like poetry. And the customers were being given bills, and they were happy about these bills, over the moon that this garage had sorted this problem. And, who wants to pay to have the car fixed? Well, this garage had managed to get their customers to want to pay to get the car fixed. And I remember leaving that, and you drive back from these installs and your brain is just alive with ideas. Like, I've just seen a business operate in this industry like I've never seen the business operate in this industry. And it was all about those front of house members of staff and the training and communication skills and understanding the value of what you do as a technician and being able to communicate that really eloquently to a customer in a way that they want it. It was just game changing for us too. I mean, we're still striving towards being what this business is. But that was, again, a real transition point in Lindley's business. Was right, actually, your front of house staff are everything in this industry. More important than, from a profitability and success perspective, than the tools or the knowledge of the technician. Great. If you're a specialist and you want to go down a complex diag route, of course you need the knowledge, but you can make a really profitable business in this industry with service technicians, as long as your front of house staff are really highly skilled at what they do.
Yeah, high quality. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Yeah, it is, and I think there's a big piece to be made. It's probably, again, we talk about a lack of management training. I think that's another one about transitioning people from other service industries into the motor industry, because there probably is a bit of a dearth of high quality service reception and service writers, call them what you will, and there isn't really a well-beaten or well-proven program of training to ensure that there is a ready supply or training for development of those guys. So it's another big challenge. And maybe
sorry, James, go on.
I said that's maybe making the difference between those garages. Profitability is you've got a bit of a team in the workshop that are doing their thing, but your business is being held back by service reception. And how many garages are insightful enough to know that that's the case? And how would you measure that? What are the metrics you might look at to even understand that that's an issue? You might be happy with the way they're talking to people because that's the way they talk to you, but it's not what the people want. And that's one of the subtleties, isn't it, of identifying a gap in the business? How do you ensure or measure or know when that's off?
Well, I want to come back to that point because that's something we've also been working on. But back to your point of there's no real sort of path for these people to go on. I think that there are a few really good courses available in the industry that service advisors can go on. But you tend to see sort of business owners going on those courses and then attempting to sort of regurgitate the information back to their front of house team. You've absolutely nailed it in a point you made earlier about bringing in people from outside of the industry. To be very clear, I think that somebody with automotive knowledge has an advantage in front of house, but it is so slight that if they lack elsewhere in their personality, then I'll take the person without the automotive knowledge 99 times out of 100. And some of our best performing front of house staff now have only been in this industry 2 years. They come from totally different backgrounds, but their people skills and their communication skills and their just the way they behave with customers is just on another level to, let's say, and it does not say it can't happen, but let's just say a technician coming through the ranks decides they want to become a service advisor. I personally think that after enough training, there is no advantage to that technical knowledge. They know enough, and actually not knowing can actually be a benefit as well, because you can get tangled up in conversations that you shouldn't really be get tangled up in. And having that lack of knowledge can actually cut conversations shorter than they should be before you end up running into a bit of trouble with the customer, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think it's a business owner thinking, right, I need a front of house member of staff. Don't limit your options, look elsewhere, find the right person. And then there are some brilliant courses. Send that person on those courses. Go on it yourself, but make sure the people go on the courses as well. Because they come back so motivated. And these consultants and these trainers, they're motivational speakers, aren't they? That's what they do. They give people the motivation to implement stuff into the business. And it's so cool when it's not the business owner and it's actually a member of staff that's going on these courses. So I highly recommend that route.
It's a great investment. Yeah, good investment. Good stuff.
You mentioned data and how do you measure service advisors as well. So there is things that, and again, part of the Garage Hive journey for us was not only do we measure technicians, we also now measure front of house. So part of a garage's process may be vehicle health checks, for example. So they health check every single car. And then of those health checks, how many become estimates? So how much is estimated off the back of those health checks? And then of those estimators, what's authorized off the back of the estimates? And then at the end of the job, what's the customer satisfaction? So now we can see how many estimates an advisor is doing, what they're authorizing off the back of the estimates, whether that's MOT failures or service advisories, etc. But then also to keep it all in line, how happy are the customers when all said and done? Yeah. So it's a great way of actually, okay, so we're now going on a project in your business of we want to improve the front of house process. How do we do that? Well, if you have the right tools in place or the right data in place, you can then start to measure the results of that project. I mean, it's another really good example of this closed loop, isn't it, of information. You try something, you measure it, you see the results, you try again.
Yeah. No, that's phenomenal. That is good. Yeah. And again, I think that's where your service advisor, technicians sometimes get a bit jaded with vehicle health checks, and they're not really, and fairly so, their view isn't on the business. As a business manager and as a leader, you have to do that because you're advising your customer of the options that should be facing them. So it's with that technician is important in executing. As you say, the top and the bottom of converting that work into a sale comes from the service advisor, and that you can manage that gives the business owner the option of correcting the loop and closing the loop to make sure it works really well. That's really interesting to hear. That is interesting to hear. Alex, can you believe we've been chatting now for about an hour and 40 minutes at this stage? I'm gonna ask you. It's been brilliant. The chat's been very insightful, and I'm going to thank you for your time immensely. I think we've covered some really good ground and given garage owners and potential garage owners and people working in the garage a lot of food for thought. And for your insight and wisdom, I thank you deeply. We have a small tradition on the podcast, which is the magic wish at the end. So thinking about, factors or things that you see in the industry that could do with changing. If you were given a magic wand and you could change two things, one on the down swoop and then one on the up swoop, what two things do you think you'd like to see changed in this industry that we both love?
So it's going to come as no surprise. But for me, it would be every business knowing that if I could just click my finger and every business owner knew each day what they needed to make in terms of gross profit, and then could see each day what that gross profit was, I think that would fundamentally solve so many issues in the industry, from recruitment to investment to increasing labor rates to just raising the standards and the value of the industry. So for me, it would be a very simple change going all the way back to the root and then just solve that root problem and then just see where it ends. Because I genuinely think it would be the most impactful change that the industry would see would be the business owners understanding costs. That would be it for me.
That would be it. No, and that's a major ambition. Now I'm going to throw you back a question. How can we achieve that? Where's the messaging? What's the conversation piece? How do we reach out to those garages? And you mentioned the RMI and the IMI as two trade organisations. We hear all too much about the technician crisis, and I think that's the symptom being looked at, not the root cause addressed. What's the way that we enlighten garage owners to take that medicine of understanding your business? How can that be achieved?
Well, it's funny because I've started to have those conversations with the bigger bodies in the industry, and the ones that have got real weight and can throw their influence around, because there isn't enough emphasis on it. It's not a very pretty topic to speak about, to tell a business owner they're not charging enough money, etc. It's quite a difficult conversation. So there is no easy way. I think that the thing that we're doing with trends is helping that matter. I think podcasts like this start the conversation happening. There's, as I said, the trainers and consultants in the industry are working wonders in raising the profile and raising standards. So I just think it's just a bit at a time. I do feel like the industry is becoming more connected through forums, and some of the Facebook groups are absolutely brilliant, and the conversations that go on there reach a lot of eyes that don't necessarily get involved in the conversation. So I think just enough people banging the drum, and it's just slow progress moving forwards. It's certainly our mission is to get garages to understand costs and then give them the data to improve those costs, that improve the results essentially. And I just think it's just a collective effort. I don't think there's no easy win. I would like it to be much more at the forefront, if I'm being critical, of the bigger businesses in this industry. Take the top 10 businesses in this industry. They would all benefit if they were much more aggressive in this area of raising the standards of the industry.
Yes, yeah. So the conversations, to keep having the conversations about managing a business effectively. Yeah, keep on keeping on.
Yep.
You make a really good point there, Alex, about the conversations such as this and forums and groups. The amount of, in inverted commas, lurkers, people that just inhabit those spaces to get positive influence from others. So again, probably hats off to guys that are running those forums and to people that are contributing, because I think there's so much good being done by just having the conversation, having it out there, that hopefully we'll be able to engender some level of change and to solve those issues, make a successful business. And it's good. That's what we need to do more of. So once again, Alex, I really appreciate your time, your insight and your wisdom, and I wish you all the success. And as the very famous, I don't know who said it, but the harder you work, the luckier you get, and may that continue for you. I love to see what you're up to from afar, and I think you're smashing it out of the park. The work you're doing with Garage Hive and driving those businesses on is amazing. So my hearty congratulations, and long may it continue.
It's been my pleasure, James. Thank you very much for the invite. It's been very enjoyable.